Welcome to our panel discussion, Hip Hop as a Movement for Positive Change. My name is Donald Jenkins. I am one of the producers of the Bridge Festival. It's a 3-day festival celebrating 50 years of hip hop culture, looking specifically at the UK perspective and also shining a light here on the northeast of England, which has kind of like had a bit of a tradition of DIY culture. And this is the third Bridge Festival after a little 5-year hiatus. We're back here and we're really great to have some amazing panelists and some of our headliners for tonight's main event of the festival, Saturday night at the Star and Shadow, class DIY anarcho cinema venue in the sort of the east end of Newcastle. And we've got some amazing, well, let's give a round of applause for all of our panelists, okay? So before we get into a little dive about who we've got on the panel, I just want to talk a little bit about the context of why we have these discussions. Hip hop is something that we usually, often maybe we just consume it. We listen to the music, we watch the graph, we watch people doing dancing, however you might engage with it. But behind of that is there are lots of issues, lots of stuff we can unpin, and obviously you can go and tune on the internet and find lots of podcasts, videocasts about kind of like if you want to kind of deep dive into a specific niche issue, okay? But in the festival, we've always had panel discussions. This is the third one that we've had, and in the past, we've kind of grappled with issues that are inside this culture that we love so dearly, but sometimes there's things that maybe don't sit quite right. So in the past, we've dealt with things like sexism and homophobia, the role of women within hip hop and stuff like that. We've talked about the kind of clash between the different ages, There's people in the room who are in the 50s, 60s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and we've talked about like how those things have contrasted between particular eras and how people battled against each other. But today, I'm not saying that we won't talk about maybe some negative things. Today is about the positivity. It's 50 years of a culture that was considered initially just a fad, started off in a borough in a country across the water, and now it's a global phenomenon, the most formed kind of consumed music genre in terms of the rap side of it, the world over, translated into many different languages. We're looking about hip hop culture as a movement for change, the positivity, celebrating 50 years today, and that's why we've got such a lush sort of panel today that kind of represents some of the kind of people who are doing some really, really nice stuff socially, working in their communities, and have done lots of stuff over the last 20 or 30 years. Okay, so let's give again a round of applause to our panelists, okay? Okay, now I've kind of given a bit of an introduction. I don't want to be mansplaining too much because it is going to be about them talking about themselves with her, but I've kind of, given you a little bit of background on who they're. We're going to start off with our headliner for tonight on the bill. We're really proud that we've actually got Blak Twang on the headline. Let's give a round of applause for Blak Twang. Okay, for those unfamiliar, Tony Rotton is a British rapper who grew up in Deptford, Lewisham, South East London. He's renowned for his live performance and respected for the effectiveness, which includes South London slang and lexicon, including references to specific London locales in his music without being too obvious about this. This has made him a favourite of English hip-hop fans who have dubbed him the original hip-hop geezer. And he's released 5 albums and 3 EPs. That was the stuff that I got off Wikipedia, right? Let's get that away, okay? His track, 5 Red Letters, which I was lucky enough to just hear him do it as an a cappella, really, but when I requested it, whatever, about the evil bills stacking up one on top of another. Feels like now, 25 years later, even more relevant today as we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, okay? I first saw him at the Diesel Awards event in Fabric in London in the early noughties. My mate was in a band, many of you from the Northeast might know, Maximo Park, and this was before they broke. We're trying to get a music deal, and they went there for an awards. Killer Keller, Normski was playing on drums, but it was, for me, the standout was Blak Twang that night. Really loved it. I last saw him play at the Boom Bap Festival in 2014 when I was helping my mate run the Rapper Delight food van, serving raps such as the Old Dirty Brisket, Little Kimchi, and the notorious P.I.G. We've got a cypher on the go with lots of festival talent on our side tent, which include the lovely Ty, rest in peace, who was a former Kingdom band member, alongside Blak Twang. Was honoured that they spat 16 bars for us, Ty, so that was like a nice moment, and we managed to kind of chat to him about various things. But today, he was also a performer of a supergroup, the Kingdom, which I mentioned there, and in 2019 they played in Newcastle, I think possibly the last time that you were up here, and was revered as one of the best British hip-hop sets in Newcastle of all time. Okay, let's give a round of applause to Blak Twang and Tony Rotton. Next up, we've got Holly. Flo Lightly is a name that should be familiar with anyone who likes to see an MC mash up the dance, having released an EP with Sicker Records, loads of different labels, and renowned for tearing up stages and shutting down sets. Holly has been carving a name for herself ever since she first picked up a mic. That was something that I took off a blog that I'd done from when you last performed for us, okay? Yeah, the personal stuff. She's done work with the Beyonders, has like been with Metalheads, and has got an amazing tune and sort of on a sub-label for Goldie. Her album, I think, is it Get Lit, not Gaslit, or is that just the name of the song? Yeah, is about her exploring a question of the narrative surrounding COVID-19. She's done time in London, Bristol, Brighton. However, she came here to the bridge, the very first bridge in 2017 when we were working at the Sage Gateshead. And I saw her whilst I was stumbling across videos, and I stumbled a track called Daydreams, and we're talking about how we need to have more women at the festival, and I suggested that we got them on, whatever, and they were off their Aperitif EP, which is sort of combined the ability to be both an amazing rapper but also a lush singer. They took part in a panel debate then, and it took them, after realising a few years, to realise how much of a connection that they'd made to the North East, and we're now to have her here as an honorary Geordie, where she lives in Wales End, and she's really kind of developed herself not just as a musician rapping here, but also as a personal development tutor. She runs writing workshops as a teacher. She's developed a music degree while she's up here, so we're proud to have her in the North East of England. Holly Lightly. Okay, next up on here, we've got Fred Swadwa, who's a colleague of mine, a friend, somebody who we've interacted with. And my background, for those who don't know me, is in youth work, where I met the next two panellists. Fred is a renowned youth worker in the area who's done a lot of work, very championing particularly young people of colour in a city which is predominantly white, and has done loads of different initiatives to kind of support different things with Crunk, which was a nightclub event specifically for young people, which I'm sure you'll talk more about that. Keep the Faith, which was a kind of record label, a variety of CDs that were released to promote North East hip hop. So he's done a lot to develop new up and coming artists. But he works at Streetwise, which is a youth project where he's worked for many years. He's the head of the North East African Association, championing not just the needs of young people of colour, but also championing people of the African diaspora all over the North East and advocating for them. He's originally a punk and a reggae head, and through his love of big audio, dynamite kind of sort of, and also his brother, people sending him back tapes from London, from the estates, he discovered hip-hop, where he already loved rebel music, and he delved even deeper into that. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about them. We've also got Tina Simbo, who's also... amazing, and someone I'm very proud to have as a friend, a colleague of my own, and now also my wife, who works with her currently as well, and as somebody who's just like really made an imprint, particularly on the west end of Newcastle, as a part of Newcastle where I lived and worked, and also the kind of area of Newcastle that often gets left out, and that's one of the things that she has never done. She's always stood ground for the people in the west end of all colours, but also championing some projects when there hasn't been necessarily a voice for young black people. She's been a real model in supporting that. And supporting things. So you're also involved in running the Crunk project as well, and doing things specifically around kind of helping young people around hip hop. She was also a rapper herself, and has kind of seen some of the negative sides of all of that. But I'm thinking something should be discussed. She maybe spoke about that as well. She's also an entrepreneur, runs her own business, using jewellery, which she kind of makes up herself and uses reclaimed jewellery and turns it into brand new, even more amazing jewellery as well. Let's give a round of applause for Tina Simbo. Not very much myself itself. My name's Donald Jenkins. I'm one of the people who produce the festival, and I love of hip hop, and I'm also gobshite, but I've got a background in running and hosting sort of podcasts and things like that. So yeah, I've already got a hand up there.
Can I give you a round of applause as well?
No problem. So let's dive in. So we're going to chance, as you know, the kind of thing is I'm going to ask them some questions. We're going to get everyone to contribute, and then we're going to get a bit of a roving mic, so there'll be opportunity for everyone to chat, ask questions and stuff like that. But we kind of want to kind of look at, like, when we look at this change thing, is we've all had a journey with hip hop in our own different kind of ways. So I want to start at the personal and then get into the political. That doesn't mean that the person can't be also political as well, but we want to start on our own individual journey. So I'm just going to go and ask in the panel in the way that they are sat along on this thing, or whatever, and I'm going to ask you the same sort of question. If you suddenly feel elsewhere on the panel that you hear something that the other person's saying, and you're like, oh, I need to chip into this, as long as you're not kind of being rude, by all means, chip in and add on something else. But you'll all get a chance to answer this question. So thinking about hip-hop, personally, for you, your journey, your life of it, how has it changed you and your life and your outlook, hip-hop culture in the most broadest sense? Holly?
It's changed my life profoundly, I'd say. It's made me move countries. It's been like the focal point of all my social circles. It's obviously, been most of my fun and my... It's just been the best part of my life,
You
really.
said countries, sorry?
Yeah, I was living in Barcelona a few years ago, and which I was loving, but I was just lacking that culture, and I decided I was doing poetry slams, and then I started rapping, and I just really wanted to be like in the scene and around really good rappers and collaborate with people. So just got a one-way flight and actually went straight to that Boom Bap 2014, just on my ones, and then met loads of friends, and then the rest is history, really.
Oh, amazing. And elaborate in terms of that, like in terms of, is it made you a career? You mentioned also in the bio and stuff like that, you do now music yourself as well. Is that not like, does that stem off from your love of hip hop or whatever? Or?
Yeah, what do you mean, what, as in the workshops?
Yeah, that kind of
stuff.
Yeah,
definitely. And now I work in a local college and I run workshops with them for songwriting and rap and stuff like that. And I don't know if I ever see it as like a career. It's a passion. But it's good that I can mix what, my career with that in some sense too,
Yeah, so again, sort of the entrepreneurial element of hip hop is just an important part as well, and the fact that you can like use your love and your passion and stuff with that. Okay. So asking the same question to yourself, Tony.
Hip-hop's, I suppose, hip-hop's my life, really.
Yeah.
From a very young age, I got into the music from, 79 as a kid. And for me, I think it's just been a case where it's the only thing that's made me really focused. It's given me focus in life as far as what I wanted to do. Because as a kid, they asked, "Yo, what do you want to be? You want to be this?" My dad probably wanted me to be an engineer like him, or my mum wanted me to be something in the medical field because she was in the medical field, or accountant or something like that. And none of it interested me as such as, or held me like hip hop did. And hip hop's been what I'd call my education. I learned so much through hip hop. I learned when I say so much, I don't just mean like rapping and information. I'm talking about getting into studios, learning how to have passion for computers, have passion for that engineering that my dad wanted me to do.
Yeah. So you kind of like, there's actually like the technicality of like what you do and stuff.
So the funny thing was, as much as I was like running away from engineering and whatever, I ended up being an engineer, a studio engineer. So I didn't do his sort of electronics engineer, I did music engineering. And that's through hip hop, because it was the love of hip hop that drew me to the studio to say, I want to learn how to actually make music, produce music, learn all the gadgets, learn how to handle a Soundcraft desk, learn how to use a 2-inch reel, learn how to sample, learn how to wire in your aux cables and all sorts of stuff like that.
It's polishing the craft, isn't it? I bet you get a little bit of that, Holly, as well, don't you? Because you work in sort of music and you've obviously invested in that sort of aspect of your polishing.
Yeah, so in a way, you look at it like that. So that's been my education on that level. And on a bigger level, it's given me my life, because it's been my career. It's places I would never, ever dream of going to around the world. Like, I've been practically around the world. Because sometimes people say, oh, you've been around the world. I haven't been to every country around the world, but I've been to every continent in the world. So, and played in every continent, and even countries that don't speak English, and met so many different people. It's afforded me an amazing...
Is there any sort of standouts in terms of like where you've gone to another country where you've just like totally bamboozled you, that there is a hip-hop scene there, or that it's like spun off in a different direction? Can you give an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you 2 examples. I played in Marrakesh years ago in a stadium. And I remember getting there, and I know they speak French and Arabic, and of course they can speak some sort of English, but they were like, yeah, this was our #1 tune of the year and blah, blah, blah. That was around Kickoff album. So back in, it was probably later than 02, but it was probably like 06, 07. And me playing there, just meeting all these people that barely spoke English, but absolutely loved the song. And when I was performing it, they were singing it word for word verbatim. So that was amazing. And then I played in Beijing. In was it Beijing or Shanghai? One of them. Beijing or Shanghai, but it was an underground bunker. So literally to get into that club, you had to go underneath the road to get into this like little tunnel, and everyone in there was pretty much 98% Chinese or 99% Chinese, didn't speak a word of English, but the energy was amazing.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff that I wouldn't really ever think while I was growing up in Deptford.
So it's something. It's not only that. It's about like how your journey has then kind of exported something to the other side of the planet and shown how your art form is universal, basically. You know, and then
and
people
they have the vinyl, the money to sign the records, and you know, it's stuff that's through hip hop.
Yeah.
And there's loads of countless other things I could tell you about, but you know, I don't want to take up everyone's time.
I appreciate that.
There you go. But hip hop is life for me. So it's more than just a music form or an art form. It's literally life.
Yeah. Fred, Sawada. King Fred.
For me, hip hop, like you've said before, I'm old enough to remember when there wasn't hip hop. So when I was coming up, you know, I wanted to be a rebel. Like, you know, I was going to a school in 99% white young people in the school, and I wanted to listen to something that sort of made me feel could express how I was feeling. At the time, reggae music was telling people how they were feeling. You know, the reggae artists were talking about racism, talking about being sort of like the other person, the poor person. And I'm not just talking about how much money you've got. I mean, as in, you know, the power structure and that type of stuff. And they were speaking like how I felt. And then punk came out, and a lot of the punk stars at the time were actually blending reggae into the music. So like The Clash, I loved The Clash because they had that energy, but they were also sort of using that reggae stuff that I was listening to. My dad had the records. My dad's got a massive record collection. And it was saying something about what I was going through, you know, going to the football match and being spat at, going to St. James's Park and everybody singing, you know, pardon for saying this, but like everybody in the stadium, 55,000 people saying he's a wog to a black footballer, throwing bananas on the pitch. But then, you know, listening to the music where the people were actually saying that's the kind of thing that they were going through, going to London, my family in London, and my cousins saying the same thing down there, and how the police were. It was rebel music, and I loved the rebel music, and all of a sudden hip-hop come out, and actually hip-hop felt more, especially when I started hearing British artists like Twang, like Rodney P, London Posse, they were talking about stuff that actually I was going through. So it felt like this is, you know, they're blending some of my dad's old music. You know, my dad will laugh now, he was going to come today, he's 93, and he's got like old soul and funk records, and he was saying, that's James Brown, they've stolen James Brown's music. I was like, yeah, okay. So it was like sort of bringing my dad's old music back that we used to listen to when we used to go to church on a Sunday, come back, and we used to dance to James Brown and stuff like that. So it was mixing that together, and so to me, hip-hop was a perfect fit. It had the energy and the do-it-yourself stuff of reggae and of punk stuff, but it was more now, so it felt as though actually this felt more better to me. I've never stopped listening to The Clash, I've never stopped listening to reggae, but hip-hop felt like this was for me. That was stuff that was before me, this was like for me, you know, and that's how hip-hop's changed me. And also, my dad came to this country in the in the early 60s, and again, found lots of racism, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Just up the road here, he tried to get houses and stuff in Heaton, literally just up the top of this hill. And he was sick of it, so he got together with a couple of guys, and he started doing, like, collectively coming together, saying, look, you know, if you're getting attacked, if you're being abused, come together and we'll go and lobby the police, we'll go and speak to council. And that was his first start of getting into sort of community work. So it's always been around us, do you know what I mean? And that's what sort of, by osmosis, has went into me, and that's why I still do it to this day.
Well, I'd say similar to Fred in terms of the experience of being black in the Northeast in the 80s, where you would hear words like wog and darky and all kinds of stuff on a daily basis. And I think for me, like, hip-hop really, like, affirmed my identity as a black person. And then just to see the creative genius of black people, like, globally recognized, that just inspired us and motivated us. It was a way, like, I used to write raps, like, in primary school. I remember there was a competition for primary schools to write a rap about the Green Cross Code, and that was the first rap that I wrote about. Oh, aye. But I remember, like, it was just a way of just to be able to express yourself and just to transmute some of that pain that you experience on a day-to-day basis. And then when I got a bit older, having the opportunity to, like, basically perform. So I had a family friend who was a DJ, and he used to put on, like, R&B and hip-hop nights at Julie's on a Tuesday. So I was underage at the time, but because they were looking out for us, my parents knew I was going, and I could get and rap on stage and kind of, like, go to his place and record in the studio. So it really helped with my self-esteem, my identity, but also, like, connectedness to other people that I wouldn't have came in contact with because of where I was living at the time I was living. And just like everybody else said, it is life. Like if you think about it, it's got all the modalities there, the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, like all of those things are represented, and you can do whatever you want with it in terms of expressing yourself. And I think that's one of the things that makes it really powerful.
In terms of also like you've have kind of also then gone on a little bit to kind of like create opportunities for other people. You sort of did some work, I mentioned it before, about this project about crunk. Would that be also an extension of that, like in terms of...
So what happened is like I got into performing like in Newcastle in the early noughties, and I was in like in a girls group, basically, and the scene was quite, it was quite insular, I would say, and there was a lot of gatekeepers, and we were quite bold and quite outspoken, and I enjoyed it, but then what I realised is like that scene didn't reflect my reality when I went to work, and I'm working with like black, brown and white young people in a kind of cohesive way. Do you know what I mean? And people have a shared sense of identity and belonging, but also I'm advocating for the anti-blackness, like advocating against the anti-blackness the young people are experiencing. So I'm on this scene now, and it's kind of like being told how I should rap, or people adopting the culture but not respecting the people. And then I just started challenging people, because how could I be going to work and working with these young people and challenging the stuff that they're dealing with, and then in my own personal circle I'm not addressing it? So I kind of like became a little bit more vocal, and eventually I stopped making music because I was working. I was doing youth work, so I didn't go to the studio on a Saturday because I was covering a youth session on a Saturday, and I didn't do certain things in the evening because I was covering youth sessions. But I'm glad, because I can see that's cascaded. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of young people who are doing stuff now that me and Fred worked with like 20 years ago. And that's a beautiful thing, do you know what I mean? Because it's part of African culture. It's about being an elder, and we are the ancestors of the future, so I always have that in mind.
I feel like we've already kind of sort of gone on to my question. It was probably question number 4, but I think we'll keep on this one. But like just generally, obviously today, for those who've been in attendance at the festival, we've had like a lot of workshops on specifically for young people. So the people involved in organising the event today, the festival as well, also have like kind of background in youth work. But like just thinking broadly about your own experiences as well, like how do you think hip hop can benefit and be of like a positive effect on young people in general? And that can be like sort of relating about like things that you've seen along the years, projects you've maybe been involved in, or just more generally like how it can kind of be a good way of like sort of being an enhancement for young people. Well, I'm going to maybe do it in a slightly different order this time. Yeah, we'll go for yourself, Tony, first of all. Yeah.
Sorry. How can it be positive? It's loads of different ways, and for me, what I've done with regards to hip hop and stuff, I've worked with charities, for example, where I worked with a charity called In Place of War, and they go to different countries that are not necessarily at war, but more like kids that might be struggling in their environment or their communities, and just set up different workshops for them, set up studios and stuff. So with that, we've been to South America, we've been to a township in Zimbabwe. We did just lots of different things where we're interacting with the local community, the young people who probably can't even afford to buy, they don't know where the next meal's coming from, sort of thing. So in a positive sense, it's afforded you that way, that opportunity to meet people and make a difference in their lives. We've been to Kenya as well, where we donated like clothes, old music equipment, like studio equipment and stuff like that, just to help people with. But that aside, on a positive level, you know, you hear that stuff when people say, oh, kids haven't really got much to do, and they've closed down all the youth centres and they've done this and they've done that. Like, I think when you get a kid that's actually interested, like early on when I was watching some of those kids in the workshop, when they were learning how to use some of the equipment, it just kind of got me thinking, like, if you could have more of these sort of things, you could then engage those kids and they won't be out there. Not saying that's necessarily directly related to the crime that's going on, but you know, as I say, devil makes work for idle hands, right? So with these kids not having much to do, hip hop is a good way to actually get them engaged, because you know they already like music. Someone said the best way to actually teach people is put it in music. So you know, all that stuff you're trying to teach people, like maths and science and whatever, you put it in a musical form, you soon find that they'll learn it a lot quicker. So I think that's a positive aspect of how hip hop can be useful to young people.
Yeah, it's just challenge those things, isn't it? I think last night we had an event on for like sort of younger artists, whatever. And it's always interesting when I see people on there that some of them are like people who I used to be their youth worker. And I know that's just a snapshot of like what we could probably see across the whole of this festival, where there's graffiti writers and stuff like that, where some of us have worked collectively across the festival with them maybe 10, 15 years ago, and it's good that they've kind of gone on and followed that passion. I feel like you've just quite recently kind of like headed in this sort of direction with your creative practice, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I'm just like interested to see how you finding that, and like what kind of things are you seeing, because you're working, is it in Wallsend itself, or
Yeah, I work at Time Met College in Wallsend, and the reason I started volunteering to do the rap and songwriting workshops is because I noticed that after COVID, there's a lot of young people that are lacking social skills and communication skills. My college is saying that they need to improve their employability in maths and English and stuff like that. So when I originally went to the college and suggested it, they were like, oh, but hip-hop has got a bad reputation and maybe it's not such a good idea. So I had to educate them as well on like the values of hip-hop, of like unity, respect, social justice, etc. And then that's what I do. I just educate the young people on the culture and the background of it, and then help embed maths and English so that the like college is happy, and then help them to get a sense of community within the college, and just have a passion and work on their skill.
Good.
And it's going really well, and they're really liking it, so it's something I want to expand, definitely.
Cool. And are you starting to see some of the changes and stuff?
Yeah,
in
definitely.
It is a buzz, and it's good when if you get to see work with the same bunch of young people for a while, and you can actually see some of the change happening. It's nice.
And I know you were saying, Tony, that like there's not necessarily a link between like things like knife crime, but I think that absolutely is. Like knife crime up here is like really on the rise. Like it's like really worrying. So I think it's more important than ever, especially like you were saying with the Tories cutting funding for youth clubs and stuff like that. I think it's more important than ever that like local artists and like it's your business, obviously, get together and volunteer and make that happen and provide that service for the young people.
Yeah. So I mean, like we have like one area in Newcastle which is called Elsick, and in just one specific stretch of a part of the West End, like one area might have just a few more things. Everywhere's been cut to bits over the last 12 years, but it's maybe just got a few more projects, and you can tell in this one area where there's been a rise and spike in knife crime, it's just that one area where there's been no work done with like the males in that area, and it's like that area where sometimes everyone's going, oh, everyone's stabbing each other, so there's people dying and stuff like that, and they're like, well, how is this happening? It's, well, there's pretty clear correlation here between the fact that the services that were there before don't exist anymore and stuff like that. But along the road, not to say that there aren't problems there's a lot more kind of opportunities just a little while ago, and still not very much, but still a bit better than this one area. So we can definitely see some like proof of like that kind of connection. Just wanted to hear yourselves coming in here on this, both Fred and Tina as well, maybe talking about that broad stroke about the impact and how kind of interventions into young people's lives can be positive, but also the fact that you both worked for a long time on the Crunk project, which I've mentioned quite a few times, but it'd be good for the audience to understand a little bit more about that. It's quite a while ago now, but I think it was a journey, and it was like what you've learned from all of that as well. So yeah, it'd be good to hear from you both of you to kind of like talk about that, if that's all right.
So yeah, for those who don't know, Crunk was just a thing at the time. We were looking for a name, and we couldn't think of one, but a lot of the young people that we were working with at the time came and just said, well, the music that they were listening to at the time, the form of sort of rap music that we were listening to was Crunk, so we just called it that because we were sick of waiting for a name. So don't get hung about the name. But basically, what was happening was I was at university studying to be a youth worker, and I was on placement at Save the Children, who were doing a project with unaccompanied minors and refugees, young refugees. And one of the things that was obvious at the time, because it was one of the first times where a lot of refugees, asylum seekers were coming to the northeast, because at one time they were all down south and they were getting dispersed up to the northeast and other parts of the country, was they were sick of being called asylum seekers and refugees, because it sort of labelled them out as being different from everybody else, being like othering. And so I was listening to them, I was working with them because I was doing delivering sexual health to them once a week. And I was just talking to them, they were just saying they're sick of being called that, they're sick of being, all of the social workers come to see them and being labelled this because they stand out at school, they stand out where they live, everybody knows what they are compared to anybody else, and they were being targeted. And at the same time, I was also, as Don's already said, I'm part of something called the North East of England African Community Association, and a lot of the young people there, my daughter being one of them, at the time was sick of being sort of labelled, BME, being seen as being different, and also by definition, weren't able to go to certain youth clubs. So when there was more youth clubs, not that there was that many then, but there was more than there is now, they weren't able to go to them because, you know, they were ruled by the dominant culture, i.e. white young people that were saying you can't come to our youth club, or some were able to go, but they were able to go on the white majority's sort of terms. You can come here, but we're going to call you certain names, we're going to treat you in a certain way, and you're just going to have to accept it. Tough type of thing, you know. And a lot of the youth workers weren't really doing much about that either. So it just struck us that actually there's this thing going on. You've got new arrivals being treated in a certain way. You've got people that are born and bred here as well. But I was also working with white young people that were actually, well, we never get a chance to mix with black young people, we're always kept apart. So I just thought, this is ridiculous. You know what? What we're going to do is the music at the moment, everybody seems to be into is hip hop and R&B music. Why don't we just put a under 18s night on somewhere, let them just come and meet each other and socialise? Simple, isn't it? You would think. But everybody was screaming, well, never, they'll stab each other, they'll kill each other, there'll be trouble. And I said, well, let's just try it. So we did. Me and Tina got together, we worked hard on it, we got these young people together into one space. It was a nightclub in town, and how much trouble was there? There wasn't any trouble. Do you know what I mean? There was the same trouble that you would have at any other youth club or any other place, you know what I mean? Young people just wanted to be together. And that was the start of us thinking, you know what, let's just do this. And then from that, we did something called Crunkers, which was getting some of the young people that were really keen and wanted to take it forward. And they would meet them on a Monday night and they would plan the next month's session with us. They would do the flyers, they would make a theme. And it was just that sort of like letting young people determine what they wanted in life. And it was about also saying that everybody's going to be a rapper, because not everybody can rap, not everybody is going to be a DJ or make music. What about the ones who want to be the street team? They did fashion, they did all kinds of stuff, all through that umbrella of music. You know, and when you think about music in general, you know, I'll ask you, is there any other music that you can think of where there's like a music form where it brings people from different ethnicities together under one umbrella? Who, in the main, you know, I'm not saying it's all harmony, like Tina said before, there's times when there's gatekeepers and stuff, but in the main, where people can come together and work together and do stuff together. Hip-hop's probably one of the only things I can think of that does that.
And also class as well, like,
What's that?
Across the class as well.
Across the classes as well, yeah, okay. And I know there's issues, I know females get a bad deal, and I know still within that, some black young people within rap music sometimes get a bad deal in certain areas as well. They get ridiculed. I know when young people up here were rapping and they were black, you know, if they were sort of doing the sort of British thing, like the East London sort of grime stuff that was coming out as well, they were sort of getting ridiculed up here for a lot of the artists up here because they were saying it should be pure and it should be boom bap. And I'm not going to get into all of that, but in the main, it's one of the only things that brings people together. I know sport does in some respects, but a lot of the time, sports has a lot to do with money as well, as in, you know, certain sports you can't do, whereas anybody can, you know, whether you've got money for, I know you can get more expensive equipment, but in the main, as long as you've got a pen and a paper and an idea in your head and you want to get it out, you can do that. You don't need expensive equipment to write a poem, i.e. into a rap. You don't need any expensive equipment. The expensive equipment comes later on when you need to record and stuff, but hopefully there's youth places as well. The other thing I always think about as well, about changing and stuff, is the fact that everybody's always waiting and saying there's no youth clubs, and I agree with that, and I get mad at that, and I know the government, i.e. the Tory government, have cut and cut and cut, but actually, we've been here before. This isn't new, you know. This is where hip-hop came from. It came from a place in America called the Bronx, where they were burning down buildings and they were basically trying to gentrify the place and get rid of them. You know, slum landlords trying to get rid of the people that were living there, which were black and Hispanic people mainly. And they did things for themselves, and I really believe that. I believe that we can't sit around and wait for people to do things for us, because if we do wait around for people to do things for us, they'll want it on their terms. So if we get money off the government will say you have to do this, 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 and this. And this is what happens when I do youth work. We get money, we get funding because I work for a charity, but you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to jump through this hoop. We want to say this, we want to say that. Whereas if you do it for yourself in the main, if you can, nobody can tell you how to do it. I think that's really important.
I I'd like to hear jumping on. I know this. Fred's talked a bit on stuff, whatever. But you know, with this thing of hindsight as well. Also now, time's moved on a little bit since this particular thing, whatever. But also, you had lots of other things that you did musically with young people and stuff like that. Just interested to know, like, you know, what your take is on terms of like how all of that went, and if you know what you think of it as a positive thing or not.
I think it was good that like Fred had the will and he didn't listen to what people were saying, because the people who were scared didn't have the experience of sort of like socializing and forming meaningful connections with people of different backgrounds. Do you know what I mean? Whereas we've done it because we were in such a small minority, we had to do it. We knew that it was possible. So I worked for Streetwise part-time, and I worked in the West End with Don over here. At the time, I didn't realise that was a glory day, like the glory days of youth work, because we had like a good budget, we had like premises, minibuses, you know, and basically if you had the idea, our remit was to like connect with young people and get them involved in like informal education. So it was like almost like an open book. So the project I set up was called Just Be Me, a play on BME, saying like, let me be myself, like their identity and culture. I respect it as much as they want to represent it, but I'm not going to say that's the only thing that's about you. And basically, yeah, I was working in a secondary school at the time and working in the local community. So I kind of used my work as a form of outreach as well for Crunk events. So what I would say is like, oh, I'll get you on the guest list. So I would pay for those young people to go to Crunk events, so I'd get them coming down from the West End, and they would love it. Do you know what I mean? I remember there's this one boy, he was so excited. He'd been dancing all night like Happy Feet, and he was like, oh, my legs were hurting. But he was so excited that he'd been to a place like that before where he felt safe. Do you know what I mean? It was a music that he was interested in, and he could sort of like have a bit of swag. And I think that's what it did. It gave a lot of young people some confidence. They could showcase their talent. They could feel safe. It built their self-esteem. And I think like, at the time, I think in 2005, there had been different riots, and there was this fear that like, oh, it was the death of multiculturalism, basically, and that's why people were afraid. But it was like, I was at uni at the time, so I was like trying to apply some of the theory that I was studying to the practice of what we're doing, and this idea that like if you help people create a shared identity and a shared sense of belonging and ownership, then they'll come together. Do you know what I mean? And that's what hip hop has done for lots of people around the world, and it was just applying that in our work. And yeah, like I'm just thinking in terms of like music, we used to because I used to rap myself. That was the way I used to connect with young people when I was doing detached work at Streetwise. Like I noticed some of the Czech, Slovak and Romanian young people would love that, you know what I mean? Or some of the like the white young people in Kenton, you know, they'd start spitting their bars and like, but in their style, and I would be doing mine. And it was just I don't know, it was so much fun. Do you know what I mean? Because young people have a lot of energy. And then also it was like being able to give young people different opportunities. So there was some young people who'd never like produced before, you know, who then you could pay them to produce for another child who could rap, do you know what I mean? And then that young person went on to get, you know who I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Or, he went on to sign to Tiny Temper, who came to Crunk event, was it for free, only for his transport, about a month or so before he got his first #1, and that's just because he believed in the ethos. So just to see that like come full circle, to see that lad sign to him now, it's like, wow. Or people that he used to produce for when they were like 12 or 13, then being headliners in, you know, at the O2, you know, and like you were saying about Kemma, who's been in a film now. Yeah, and I remember
Daniel Blake, who starred Daniel
exactly.
Daniel Blake, and he's like, a nationally recognised kind of actor now, really, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. And it was their interest, do you know what I mean? Like, as much as I love that music, it was like, it was a young people's interest, because as a youth worker, you do what they want to do, and it just so happened they wanted to do the stuff that we liked anyway, do you know what I mean? And you could sort of like...
I didn't like it.
You didn't like it? Or you didn't like rapping?
No, I didn't like their style of rap, but you know.
Yeah, but anyway. But yeah, so that was the beauty of it, basically, trying to bring people together, creating opportunities, and just like seeing that cascade.
Cool. So we talked a lot bit about what kind of personal connections and our own thing. We're kind of trying to look at that kind of broader thing. So wanted to sort of think about like what positive impact has hip hop had on society as a whole. And whilst we're doing that, inevitably, I said that we wouldn't get into the negative side. But you know, like often you've already touched upon it before when you were talking about like your experiences in college and having to explain that the positive side of hip hop. But too often we're talked about like, you know, the negative sides of it and the isms, the things that like maybe kind of like hip hop has a bad reputation for. But I'm interested to find find out what positive impact has hip hop had. Now it's 50 years old. What has it had on society? And is it all positive? Is there any negatives? But, you know, be open and honest about it. You know, me and Fred had a little bit of a discussion about this the other day, and I hope that he maybe raises some of those. But I'd like to hear from yourself first of all, Holly. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's just all positive. Like,
Yeah.
I just think it's a beautiful thing. I think like bringing people together, like giving senses of community, like encouraging young people to like develop their skills and get together and showcase them is wicked. And I'm always trying to encourage them. Like, if you've got a problem with someone, battle them.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to like
don't
actually
resort
have
to
a
violence.
fight. Like,
Yeah.
And I mean, in my life personally, I would say like it's a bit dramatic, but I would say it saved my life because there's been times, you know, when it gets really dark and I didn't know what else to do, so I just did music, and then that's just like the one, consistent thing that's kept me going, really. So I think maybe I'm looking through rose-tinted glasses, but I just think it's wicked. I love hip hop. It's a positive thing for everyone. I mean, look at us today.
Yeah. We're here in the cinema talking, and we've got the privilege to be able to chat about these kind of things. Yeah. Tony?
I think the positive aspect it's had on the world would be the fact that it's created an industry.
Yeah.
It's created employment for a lot of people that wouldn't have an opportunity to actually, you know, experience that type of lifestyle. And also the fact that it's taken a lot of people off the streets. There were a lot of people that were headed in like some real dark directions that found music, and hip-hop music in particular.
Yeah.
And I think they've touched on it already. Like, it's brought society together in a sense that, in a way that no other music has done before. The only other thing that brings people together like that, as King Fred said earlier, would be sports. Hip-hop doesn't really discriminate when it comes to... It's all about how good you are. I mean, I know the political side of it could be when the other record executives get involved and they want to start marketing you and, you know, who looks what face fits whatever. But the fact is, from the very beginning, organically, it's all about how good you are. Whether it's a DJ, whether it's a graffiti, whether it's rapping, whatever. So I think if you look at it from that aspect, it's just a positive, it's a positive impact on people's lives just because it does all those things that we mentioned earlier. And more importantly, it's giving people jobs, because believe me, a lot of people will start doing some other mad shit. So, yeah. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, that's what I think.
Fred?
Yeah, just follow on for that. Obviously, if you look at it, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry right across the world, and it's sprouted up in some of the most poorest areas of this country, some of the most poorest areas of America, where it came from, and now you're looking at places like Africa that used to get laughed at. You know, if you were ashamed to say you were from Africa at one time. Now people are strutting around saying that I'm from Africa, and what? You know what I mean? And they're coming. It's hip-hop based, it's not, or rap based, but it's not exactly what we would class as hip-hop. But you're looking at stuff like Afro beats now. Do you know what I mean? Look at how that's dominating. Look at Nigerian music, Ghanaian music. Look at the film industry as well. That's coming out of Nigeria and Ghana as well, and other countries in Africa. Those people would never have had a chance if it wasn't for coming together collectively through hip-hop. Where hip-hop came from the Bronx. When you think like a virus, when you talk about COVID, I would say hip-hop is a virus in the same way. It started off in one place and it's just spread all over the world. You've got people rapping, you've got people DJing, you've got people being entrepreneurs. You know, it's not just about the rapper and the DJ. You're talking about people who now run their own record labels. You're talking about people who have got street teams. You've got fashion coming out of it. I've just been watching the end part of Wu-Tang, the saga. It's not great, but actually just to watch how the guys got their Wu wear into Macy's and all these places, just amazing. Because those people were destined to die young, you know, by dealing on corners. That's what was going to happen to them before hip-hop touched them as a virus.
And also another aspect is, as we all know, like music is a brutal industry where people really struggle to make a living from it. So in order to survive, you've got to have some other incomes as well. And people have like learned how to be entrepreneurs. And, you know, as we know from all of the Wu-Tang, they've all kind of now got their own kind of niche in different things, everything from alcohol to T-shirts to all sorts of stuff, you know, and it's so vital.
And in the past, when music's come out, so when you look at like Motown and how it got diluted and stuff like that, this is probably, to me, I know record execs got in the way, and I know there's people, rich people, middle-class white men, you know, always being somewhere around there manipulating and saying this is what. So when we're talking about the negative side is promoting the bad or promoting the sort of negative aspect of hip-hop. You know, we can't hide from it. Some of the disrespect for women, the homophobia, the black on black violence that's encouraged, all of that stuff yes, it's negative, but we've also got to look at the other parts of it. If we just concentrate on the negative, we'll not look at all the beautiful stuff that's going on there as well. And there is a lot of beautiful stuff in there because for all the black on black violence, for instance, there's a lot of non-violence going on because people are gainfully employed. People are doing other things. That's got to be a good thing. You know what I mean? So for me, hip hop's done a lot of good things to change the world. And we've got to remember that as well as there is negative stuff. And we should not shy away from it, not hide from it, keep working to try and change that as well. But also celebrate the good stuff as well, because we don't celebrate the good stuff enough.
T?
Yeah, I was just saying, like, in my head, the way I think about it, like, okay, yes, it is a genre, like, well, it was music, it's culture. So it's like saying, is literature positive or negative, or is music in general positive or negative? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it depends on how it's used and who decides what's positive. Yeah. So I think, like, all of that other stuff that's connected to poverty or anti-blackness it's there in society anyway, regardless of whether hip-hop was there or not. But it gave people, basically, for their own survival. Do you know what I mean? Because the block parties were about fun, about like relaxing, having some solace away from the oppression people were dealing with. And then it's become something, do you know what I mean, global that lots of people can identify with. So I feel like, yes, it can be used as a tool for positive, yeah, the same way that like a pad and a pen can be, the same way that TV can be, the same way that theatre can be. Do you know what I mean? And I think it just demonstrates like the resilience of people of African descent, the diaspora, do you know what I mean, and everybody else who informed it. But like in those conditions, this is what they've done that's dominated the world, and that can't be denied. Do you know what I mean? Maybe in, 200, 300 years' time, people might deny the origins of hip-hop. Do you know what I mean? Like that, the origins of Egypt, should I say, have been denied. That'll probably happen again. But I think like it's there and we're living it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Just before we open up to panel, sort of wanted to talk about something more, I suppose, kind of contemporary. Obviously, you know, people will talk about 2020 being the sort of the point of the movement, but obviously the Black Lives Movement had been around for a lot longer, and obviously had been named other things or whatever, but obviously 2020 was it kind of like a zeitgeist sort of moment for the kind of Black Lives Matter movement. Obviously we were in the middle of the pandemic and stuff like that, but I noticed a lot in terms of just releases generally in terms of rap music, that there was like acts that hadn't been political for a long time were putting out some of their most political work ever. You know, Arrested Development, you know, a band that never really particularly rated, brought out 2 really, really strong albums in 2 successive years, very, very politicised. We had Mr. Lift coming back with some really strong stuff. We had some great stuff coming from Britain as well. So I'm just interested to know, like, in terms of like the positive impact Black Lives Matter had. I mean, multifaceted like that thing, and I know it's like it's a big wide issue and it hasn't changed a lot of shit as well, so but I'm interested to know in terms of like the way that the hip hop community responded, what your thoughts are in terms of like all of that type of thing. So anybody who wants to come in, come there.
Yeah, I can. I'll jump in. Let's look at it. You look at America, when they were marching and when they were coming together collectively, and it wasn't all blacks, it wasn't all, you know, it was blacks, Hispanics, it was whites in there as well, but they were all singing one song. They were singing Kendrick Lamar's song. Yeah. I don't know the exact name of the song. Is everything's going to be all right? Are we going to be all right? Yeah, that's what they were chanting. That's hip hop, isn't it? Let's face it, you know what I mean? They were coming together collectively and they were saying, we need to change this. We can't have another black man killed or a black woman killed at the hands of the police. And they did something about it. They came together. And it, you know, it was getting reported that it was a Black Lives Matter, and I'm not going to go on all the politics of it. It's communist, it's that. It's revolutionary, it's trying to take over the government. What it was people coming together who was sick, and it wasn't just black people. And that's the bit that they don't want to talk about. Do you know what I mean? It was people coming together and using hip hop again as the voice. It's not the first time. When the Vietnam War was on, people came together. It's not new for people to collectively come together and use music as a sort of tool, but hip hop's been there since it came out as a tool for change. When we talk about the Bronx and where they came from, they were coming together, yes, to have parties to get together, but also about helping to pay their rent. They were having rent parties where they would charge people to come in to the building to have a party because they needed help to pay the rent. That was happening in this country way back before even hip hop was around. So it's not new. It's just people coming together, and I think for me, it's a really important, powerful tool.
I think what happened in 2020, really, in a way, I think it just readdressed the balance of where the music was going, because what we must remember is that growing up, when I was growing up anyway, what really actually got me into the hip hop stuff was your Public Enemies and your KRS-Ones, your NWAs, as much as it was different styles of political activism, it was more, they were saying stuff that really meant stuff. And back then, if you think about it, they were selling a lot of records, really impacting a lot of young people's lives, giving them a lot of history about themselves, giving them a lot of self-awareness, knowledge of self. And then the music took a turn, where, and as Fred, you know, talked about earlier, he said, you know, the record company realized, actually, let's promote this particular genre of music, and there was not really a balance. So it was a lot of negativity, a lot of sexualization, a lot of violence, a lot of gang stuff and whatever. But then all the stuff that was talking about, you know where you came from, know what your ancestors have done, know yourself, know that you can be this. You know, KRS-One did You Must Learn, Nas did I Know I Can, Public Enemy did Fight the Power. All of a sudden, you didn't hear those type of rap records anymore. Do you know what I mean? You started hearing about like Big Pimpin' and, you know,
and it was so important as well. Like both from, I was speaking to Fred about this the other day, about from a point of view that I can't really, from what he was saying as a black person growing up and learning about oneself through this music, but also as a white person, whether learning about stuff that I didn't know. Remember,
exactly.
Like Marcus Garvey and listening to like Black Star Liner, being educated about bits of black history that you know fuck all about in history. You don't get taught that at school. You know what I mean? And you're suddenly kind of like, and it makes you want to go and find out more about it and stuff. You know, so it's so important.
So I think with that whole thing happening with the Black Lives Matter stuff, I think that just made other hip-hop artists suddenly realize, actually, there is a lot of stuff to talk about. And it's really funny because, especially in the age we're living in now, we should have a lot more to talk about. There's so much madness that's happening in the world, whether it comes to some of the stuff we talked about with regards to refugees, whether it regards to what's going on in Ukraine and all that stuff. And rappers don't talk about that. They just want to talk about, like, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of superficial stuff that's not really going to make much of a difference to young people's lives. So young people now don't really respect you when you're talking about that real stuff. And when I say real stuff, I mean real life, socially conscious stuff. They're more respect to you. You tell them I could buy a Cullinan or a Bugatti or whatever, or do you know what I mean? So I think that, in a way, the fact that you said that all these rappers, all these artists that hadn't put out like records that you would consider political, suddenly decided, actually, there's stuff to talk about. So that was a good thing with the Black Lives Matter.
I just hope it kind of continues as a way. Any thoughts on this at all, Holly?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a political rapper. And I love all that. I mean, when in 2020 with BLM, there was quite a few people on the internet that were saying that as a white rapper, I'm racist and I'm profiting off the culture and stealing it and stuff like that, which, to be honest, like devastated me. But I went into a little like Google Scholar vortex and I read a lot of papers about it, and it seems that if you understand the culture and the history and you're willing to educate other people in that, and by the way, it doesn't even matter what any of my class, if my class is about healthy eating, I'm like, I will always get like Babylon in, I will always get Jamaican sound system culture, I will always find a way to educate the young people, which are like mainly white in the classes that I teach, about it. And I think if you're authentic to yourself and you endorse the values of it, then it's okay because you're celebrating the culture. So it was as a result of that, I ended up doing a degree and I wrote papers in the history of it and stuff like that. So I'm pleased that it made me question that and then improve my knowledge. And now I feel,
Yeah, you must learn, that's what we're saying. Tina, any thoughts?
Okay, BLM. To be honest, by 2020, I was a bit annoyed, with the BLM movement because it started before that. Do you know what I mean? When that young man was murdered, So it was like, was it 2012 or something like that? That's when it actually started. Yeah. So I think it was just the fact that, like, in the middle of the pandemic, do you know what I mean? And people had to pay attention to what was happening, and people couldn't like distract themselves with their everyday life and with their work.
I literally was about to use that word and say, did it feel like it was a bit of a distraction?
I think a lot of people engaged more because it's like they had to watch the news. And if this might sound cynical, and it is cynical, but I also think like the fact that black people and allies, or people who chose to be allies, were out on the street at a time when they'd been hearing so much about how, like, if you were black, you're more likely to die of COVID. Do you know what I mean? But people are still willing to risk their life. And also, if they continued to demonstrate out in the public, COVID wouldn't go away quickly. Do you know what I mean? So that's the cynical side. It's like, it wasn't just like, it's not going to affect everybody else. Because in the past, black people being getting murdered by the police for like, what, centuries?
Hundreds, yeah.
But people didn't always, like, en masse choose to engage with the movement. But this was the first time that black people protesting could have an impact on the rest of the world. And I think that's why people paid attention a lot more. And that's why people who wouldn't normally think, I need to educate myself, thought, this is something I need to do. And it might sound cynical, but I just think there's something about that. It's like, we're willing to die for this, and everybody else is going to be affected about the fact that we're not going to stop. So yeah, and I think the reason I'm saying I was just a bit annoyed, because I remember like one of the hip hop songs that politicised me was, believe it or not, was The Chronic, and it was the skit where you had, I think it was some Nation of Islam people selling newspapers on the street, and the guy said, if I have to die today for this little African have a future, I'm a dead mother. And I was like, wow, that was so powerful. Like, what would make this black man in America care so much and feel so passionate? Do you know what I mean? And so that's when I started politicising myself a bit more. And I was lucky that I grew up at the time when you did have a lot of Spike Lee films, do you know what I mean? And Malcolm X came out. Yeah. So it was a popular thing. But like the current 2020, it did annoy us a bit, just because I'm thinking now, this is what it takes. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Folks, we're going to open it up to questions here. We've only got time for a couple of questions because we're actually supposed to be starting a cypher about now in the next room, okay? And I'm sorry, so I hope you have got a lot out of just kind of like the question that's gone. But Riddler over here is going to... Has anyone got a question? We've got, first of all, we've got the person over there, Fisa Humpledink, and we've got you next, okay?
Brown person, I'm totally glad that you came over. Hi. It was in regards to, Tony, what you'd said. I was speaking to a young person who's actually gone now, which is a bit of a shame, about Don, that's too high for us, Riddler, sorry, I'm like this. When Don has performed at various events as a hip-hop act, and I'm in that space as a woman, as a brown woman, there's just a lot of young white men talking about bitches and hoes and Bugattis, and I'm going to be shy as fuck wearing shit trainers whilst doing it. And I'm just sitting there and I'm just going, I heard this shit 20 years ago. And then on the flip side, as a youth worker and as a practitioner for young people, I'm going, but that's their lived experience. So as a panel, what advice would you give to young men, generally young white men, about the power that they yield when they're on that stage if they don't have the lived experience to go with it?
That's a good question. I can't remember who said it, but someone said that some people want to adapt the culture. What was it you said again? Just 'cause I don't want to misquote you.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I know like when I was doing music, I was being told that this is how I should rap. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And basically, and there was some gatekeepers, and it kind of like, so that kind of made us think, I don't want to, you lost the kind of vigor to get up on stage and like, do you know what I mean, want to rap and stuff like that. So the word kind of like, you can say, yeah, appropriating, but the elements of it that they wanted to celebrate and saying this is what it is, and kind of like being Puritans. I used to call them the vanguards of hip hop at the time. Yeah, and so that's what I was saying about my experience.
So I said that because, you know, what you said was really poignant in the sense that, you know, you want to adapt the culture, but you don't want to embrace the culture. So I think it's important that if you're up on stage and you've got that opportunity and that platform to actually do all what you just described, but don't understand the magnitude of your words and understand the history behind some of the stuff that you're talking about, but you're trying to be like your favourite rappers, for example, you know, bitch this and hold that and Bugatti this and Bugatti that. Like, the truth is, if you came from the struggle, you'd understand why those rappers were rapping the way they were rapping. However, because you're probably looking at them thinking, what do you know about all that stuff you're talking about? But it sounds good because, you know, that's their favourite rappers. Advice I would give them is just, you know, just like Don said earlier, go back and do some research, do some homework, really understand the history behind this music, the pain behind this music, and what's influenced, you know, that sort of lyrical content. That's what I would say to any rapper, whether black, white, whatever ethnicity you are. Just have a better understanding of what you're saying and how it can impact people.
Okay. We're going to probably go to the next question unless anyone's really want to pipe on us.
I'll just say, if you're rapping, like, rap about your own experience as well, because there'll be an audience for that. Because they're in Newcastle, and the majority of young men are white. So there'll be white young men who are into, like, who can relate to what your experience is. So, like, but I know people feel like maybe it won't be accepted, but there will be people who want to hear that as well.
Yeah. Okay, we've got one person over here. What's got you next? Yep.
Right, okay, I had to write this down because otherwise my brain's crap, so I'd forget.
It's called old age.
And also get it down better. Growing up as a white boy in Oxford, hip-hop called out to me and introduced me to so many new forms of music being used. I love the background to the music, the samples, etc., and it opened my eyes to Black's struggle and their history, which I've passed down to my kids as well. So there's two questions. Holly and Tony, when producing new music, do you look into the background of the artist you sample, if you use sampling, that you're using? And Fred and Tina, have you used the history of the music artists that are being sampled? And do you talk about those musicians' struggles and bring them into modern life?
Cool. Should we do it as the questions as you said them, so that to Holly and Tony first of all, yeah?
Okay, go on. I don't mind.
Yeah, go on.
You want to go? So for me, it's actually funny. That's a really good question because when I discover music, it's more because I've heard something. I thought, oh, that sounds amazing, and then you start to do your sort of homework and think. Like I discovered, I might hear like a Burt Bacharach riff and think, what the hell is that? That sounds incredible. And then I'm like, then I look into who made it and stuff like that. So that's, in fact, that's another thing that hip hop did on a positive level because it widened my knowledge of actual music and not just sort of music that my parents listened to, which would have been reggae and Afro beats, like original Afro beats, which is the Fela Kutis of this world, and funk. I got into like all types of different music, and that was because through sampling, I just wanted to know who done this and what other works what they've done. But I didn't necessarily look into the background as far as find out where they started from. All that did was make me it took me on, it's like a rabbit hole, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's like you literally start looking into the music and you're like, it takes you down this mad journey where you find out more and through that, your knowledge just increases and increases.
Yeah, later on we've got like a Boca 45 playing on and that's that whole thing about appreciating not the samples of where the music frame came from. They're going to be playing lots of like...
Yeah, and in a way, Spotify is actually good for that as well because sometimes you pick a particular record and Spotify then picks other records similar to that and you start to discover like all these other new artists and new songs. So yeah, similar sort of thing. Cool.
I wouldn't say I really like produce and sample music, but I mean, if I did, I feel like I would. I like going to like little Google vortexes and research into like whatever I'll be writing about at the time. But I get what you're saying about educating yourself on the music that you're using.
Yeah. Cool. Fred and Tina?
Me personally, I wasn't a producer, I was a rapper, so I used to look at more about expressing yourself and talking about what you're going through. So I used to hire producers to produce, so maybe they did do that, but I didn't, if I'm honest.
From a youth work perspective, for me, very much so, because when things are happening to young people, they think they're the first time it's ever happened to them, the good and the bad. They think, oh, this is the first time it's ever happened. And it's really important for them to know about. So we had some young men that were really annoyed because they felt nobody was listening to them. They lived in the Biker Wall and they were getting attacked on a daily basis, racist attacked. Their parents were being disrespected to the point where they started carrying knives. And I had to sit down with them and talk to them. I don't know if you remember this, but they jumped up and said, well, what do you know about it? And I said, what do I know about it? I said, it hasn't just happened to me. And me feeling as though I have to get a knife. And I've been beaten up and attacked. But my dad has and my uncles have. My uncle got his front teeth knocked out in Heaton of a gang of racists. It's happened to us as well. So you need to sit down and please listen. So, and I've used that as well as in when we're talking about, like, when they're talking about music as well and saying, these things aren't new. These are things that have happened before. This guy's done this guy's done that. You know, I talked about James Brown and the fact that everybody loves him, but there's an issue with the fact that he domestic violence, and talking about that and bringing it out into the open, and then likening it to Gaza and stuff that Gaza's done. And people love Gaza as a national treasure, as a footballer, as a Geordie, but at the same time, he's been linked to domestic violence. And using that and talking about it and not saying that nobody's an angel. And people have done things. It depends how far you want to go at the saying, right, I'm going to what we call cancel now. It wasn't cancel then when I was doing the youth work with these guys. But, you know, talking about I'm not going to use his music or I'm not going to bother playing his music because he's this or she's that. So talk about that, you know.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can totally subvert the meaning of it. Like there's a band, what was it, Davy Diggs, who's in a band like quite experimental hip hop. He's in the guy from Hamilton, the TV show, but he's also a rapper as well. I'm looking at my wife Nafisa, we just went and talked about what they're called again.
Sorry, I was just posting those.
All right, okay. Anyway, we saw it before, but like in their song, they sampled, White House, which is like a noise industrial band, and it's like very white kind of music, and they kind of be linked to like nationalism. But like with their song Squeal Like a Pig, Squeal Like an Eel, but he's totally subverted it and turned it into something else. So I think like you can maybe not necessarily know the background of it, but like, here's a pro-black artist who's kind of like going, fuck it, I'm going to do something completely different.
I wonder what that band
twist.
thinks of.
The royalties.
Okay, we've got one last question here. Okay. Yep.
Hello guys, big up. The lack of balance for artists that are being like thrust into the mainstream. It's a two-part question. So what can we do about that, and do you think it's by design?
That's what I was referring to earlier when I said with regards to the Black Lives Matter question. I think it's been a problem for a long time, but then you got to think industries always look at the bottom line, and it's like fashion, it's like food, it's like whatever. If they think this particular one's working, is going to make them more money, that's the one they're really going to push all their money behind. The way we can address that balance is as a people, or as an audience, or as fans, or whatever, we've got to do better research. We've got to go and look for what we really want to do, and let art be art. Do you know what I mean? We can't keep getting spoon-fed and keep getting told what sort of music to listen to, and that's the only way we're going to be able to address that balance, because what happens is, I mean, using myself as an example, right? After putting out a bunch of albums and me thinking I'm growing as an artist and my music's getting better and stronger, and you will attest to that because you work with me all the time, somebody at a record label or a radio station decides, oh, yeah, he's no longer relevant. Even though my music's even better than my music that I put out firstly. And that's because they're always on to the next. It's always about on to the next. And this generation is, especially when it comes to black music or hip hop music or whatever, like, it's very much discarded like pistachio shells. Do you know what I mean? And it just feels to me like we as an audience, as consumers, need to then, in order to readdress this balance, just go for what you like rather than what you're being told to like. And I think that's the only way we're going to be able to deal with it, because right now, yeah.
And listen to the DJs that actually play that stuff.
Exactly. So,
any last contributions from the panel here on this particular topic?
I think it's a very dangerous thing to let industry dictate culture. Absolutely, that's not where it came from, and that isn't really where it should go. But when there's undeniable talent, they can't do anything about it. Like Burna Boy selling out Wembley, like Lil Kana just smashed Glastonbury. Like it comes a point where they have to embrace it. And I don't really watch the commercial stuff so much. I'm just really about the underground.
All right, folks, I'm afraid we have to bring this to close. It's one of those things where we could probably carry on talking for ages and ages, but thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon and coming and watching this in the Star and Shadow. We've got 4 panelists who I hope you've got an amazing insight into kind of the positivity of hip-hop, maybe some of the negative stumbles, whatever, looking at the personal, the political, and everything in between. So let's give a round of applause to our amazing panelists. Thank you, Flo Lightly. The Blak Twang, Tony Rotton, the King, Fred, the Simbo. If you're watching this online, this is our YouTube video. This is a panel discussion. Hope you've also enjoyed this, and do check out the artists involved in here. We'll have some links of all of this stuff in the comments below. I think that's what you're supposed to say. My name's Donald Jenkins. I am also a producer, programmer. Do check out Born Lippy NE. That's an imprint that I put on. And also check out The Bridge UK Festival to find out more about events in the future. We hope to speak to you soon. These folk need to go and perform. So we'll see you soon. Thank you.